Kalispera σας. Good evening to everybody. Welcome to the evening sessions of the CoMuseum 2023. Welcome back and welcome online. Our next speaker will be online. She's an ardent proponent of the civic role and civic engagement in museums. So please welcome Esme Ward, Director at Manchester Museum, the University of Manchester. Esme, hello.
Hi. Oh, it's wonderful to be here.
Building a more equitable future. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And it's wonderful to be here. And I'm very, very sorry I can't be with you. It's chilly in Manchester. I'm going to share my slide and get started. So I'm hoping everyone can see a black and white photograph. So thank you for inviting me. My name is Esme Ward. I'm Director of Manchester Museum at the University of Manchester. My pronouns are she and her. And I'm going to talk about, I hope, a more equitable future for our museums. And I'm going to talk a lot about a specific example in Manchester. So what I'd like to do is take a little time to just set the scene. So we're going to go back to the late 19th century, to the northwest of England, Manchester, and the world's first post-industrial city. Manchester Museum, you see it being built in front of you here, is a neo-Gothic building and part of the university. And it opened its doors in 1897 to the civic spirit, scientific curiosity, and rather beautifully, the devotion of the townsfolk of Manchester. Originally, it has collections that belong to the Natural History Society, like the sperm whale that you can see here with the taxidermist Harry Brasenose still above it. And this continues to lie above our Living Wills gallery. Foundational collections and financial support came from early textile industrialists. With success in textile manufacturing, rested on slave-grown cotton. And we're at the height of British colonial power, the museum grew significantly. The early 20th century collecting frenzy, and I think there is no other word, and the museum's critical role as colonial repository saw botany, Egyptology, archaeology, and anthropology collections grow at pace. All over the world, indigenous artifacts, ancestors, significant cultural heritage were stolen, taken, traded, studied, resulting in thousands of collections, including the museum I run, being held in institutions. Today, Manchester Museum is one of the largest museums in the UK. So whilst it was indeed born of civic ambition, it was also very clearly born of empire. And our work to address this history is urgent, critical, and I believe utterly pivotal to our future. The reality is today, and I'm going to speak for museums, my own museum, but also I think museums in the UK, we're in trouble, I think. And like our founding fathers, a collective sense of purpose, civic and social responsibility has been eroded. The traditional museum model is broken. Multiple financial, this is a bit grim, sorry, but I'm doing it. Multiple financial challenges result in less money year on year. There's been a hollowing out of curatorial and collections expertise. Our failure to address the threat and implications of the climate and biodiversity crisis mean we pretty much just keep on collecting. Profusion is king. We rarely want to dispose of collections. And ultimately, I think we probably care more for collections than we do for either people or planet. And we still, I think, fail to fully acknowledge, interrogate and address the impact, complexities and legacy of empire in all our work. And yet, at our best, although perhaps too rarely, our museums, we know, are such powerful spaces for identity forming, attending to difference, and truth-telling. They can ask, what's the story we tell ourselves about ourselves? And they still remain among the few and in our case, free civic spaces that bring generations together and communities together to learn and explore what it means to be human and live in this world. So I was appointed director of this museum in 2018 to lead and support a transformative shift in the museum's culture, relationships, spaces, and work. And our work sits within the context of a university. You can see us at the heart of campus here, with a core commitment to social responsibility alongside teaching and learning. And I'm in a city region where well-being and equity goals sit at the heart of its strategy for a fairer future. Because Manchester, like many cities all over the world, is an all too familiar tale of two cities. Growth, wealth, and international ambition sit alongside persistent health, educational, and racial inequalities, with an utterly shocking 42% of children, 42% of children under 16 living in poverty. So our mission in the museum has never been more urgent or necessary. It's to build understanding between cultures and a more sustainable world. We want to be the most inclusive, imaginative, and caring museum you'll ever visit, and those values drive everything we do, or we try to ensure they drive everything we do. I guess put simply, we want to be a place where people feel they belong, and that means opening up. And actually everything I'm going to talk about is opening up to new relationships, to new people, to new perspectives. It means telling truths, new stories, more complex stories, and collaborating to become the museum our city, our region, and its people need. And if I'm honest, we're really grappling with what an ethics of care should be for an institution like ours. We're born of empire and built on a series of extractive practices. We're in Manchester, a city that bears more than its fair share of responsibility for the climate and ecological crisis. But it's also a city we love dearly. It's proudly built by migrants. It's a city of sanctuary. It's known, loved, and celebrated for its commitment to radical movements and social justice. How do we operate in this city? We have to conceive of care, not solely for collections, but for people, beliefs, ideas, relationships, and land too. This is an image from our first iftar in 2019, the first ever, I think, held in a UK museum, open to all faiths and none, and a great partnership with the Manchester University's Muslim chaplain. So we think if we want a deeper sense of emotional and communal engagement, belonging, and ownership for everyone, we have to create the conditions that enable and encourage that. And for us, that doesn't just mean programs like the iftar and events like this. It includes new multilingual galleries and a whole host of new co-designed inclusive spaces that just didn't previously exist in my museum. They include a prayer space, a picnic area, beautiful picnic area, a quiet room, a therapy room, and fully accessible changing places. The loo, the brew, and the view, I was told, is what we should focus quite a lot of our energy on. One of our new galleries is the South Asia Gallery that you see here. It's been driven by a spirit of collaboration and co-production and brings lived experience and collections together with a new commission by artists, the Sing Twins, that you get a glimpse of, a kind of emotional map of British Asian experience that sets the tone and welcomes you in. So when I came into role, this gallery, the plans for it were already set. It's a partnership with the British Museum, and it was originally conceived of as a professionally curated chronological gallery, aimed rightly at attracting more South Asian audiences, traditionally underrepresented at the museum. But, you know, build it and they will come has never been enough. And soon after I started, we paused the project to ask whether it really was as inclusive and imaginative as it needed to be. We brought together 130 people that we'd consulted, but maybe not listened to as much as we should have done. We brought them together for a lunch to ask them the question that mattered most. What do you really care about? And our invitation made clear that from that moment on, the South Asia Gallery sought to be a creative, collective, and social endeavour. What if we could build the UK's first permanent gallery dedicated to exploring the experiences, cultures, and contributions of South Asian diaspora? And what if it's not the museum doing it? What if it's all of us? So the South Asia Gallery Collective was born from this lunch, 30 extraordinary people who've worked with us over the past 5 years. This is a co-curation on a pretty epic scale. Our lead curator, Nusrat Ahmed, amazing woman, led on creating the conditions for collaboration and ensuring lived experience, research and story making were valued and at the heart of the process and design. One of the reviews we received soon after opening really summarizes, I think, why this matters. And visitors always have the best lines. So I'm gonna share it with you. The honesty of the impact of colonialism in our communities is one of the reasons I'll be bringing not only my South Asian friends, family, and my parents to the museum, but my non-South Asian loved ones too. The gallery shares a part of me I may not have been able to express in words to them before. And this opens the museum up to a whole new audience, such as my mother, whose visit to this museum will be her first visit to a museum ever. I feel it's important for her to come here, and there's something so emotional about that in itself. Places we felt excluded from our whole lives and shield our parents away from because they felt like white spaces, I can now walk into proudly with my mother while she wears her shalwar kameez and learns about and celebrates her history. Alongside the South Asia Gallery, we opened a multilingual Chinese culture gallery, developed in partnership with the University of Manchester's China Institute, with a shared ambition to build understanding between Manchester and China in the face of growing discrimination and an increasingly challenging political context. In a first for all of us, our reopening was profiled in the New York Times. Go figure, great headline. They usually only ever talk about Manchester and football. And since February, over 700,000 people have visited, double the number we received before. But much more than that, finally, our visitors reflect our city, with over a third from the global majority. And for 12% of our visitors, we are the very first museum they have ever stepped foot in. And that desire to build empathy and a sense of belonging extends far beyond the exhibitions and curatorial work of the museum. Over the past 4 years, we've been closed a lot with building work, and for a while we closed completely to most of the public. But there's been a quiet revolution happening inside the museum. We've opened up our entire top floor that you see here to become a home to environmental, educational, and social justice charities in our city that share our mission and vision to build a more sustainable world. I'll be honest, it's an experiment to see whether and how we might become the museum the city and its people need. For nearly 5 years, we've been home to an alternative arts college and proud headquarters of the amazing charity Pink, who work with neurodivergent 16 to 25-year-olds. They've grown in the museum from a couple of desks in 2018 to now having a studio, classroom, and a dedicated therapy room, which is also home to the Greater Manchester Young People's Mental Health Lead. They've also expanded to more than a dozen other heritage venues across the UK. Their students are involved across the museum, and we now know that 17% of our overall visitors identify as neurodivergent. So on this top floor, we also have a greenhouse, a co-working hub and lounge for those charities, researchers and activists, an artist studio, seminar rooms, and a whole series of display cases that share the work of all of these partners. I guess we're bringing people together to learn, support, build community and capacity, redistribute funding, make plans, breathe. I mean, socially responsible museums are nothing new in my city, but it is still, I think, unusual to find so much space and resource dedicated in this way. And shared commitment to environmental action and social justice locally is what frames this work. To use our collections, use our expertise, profile, use the museum, to be frank, in whatever way possible to build a more sustainable world on our doorstep. We've got no time to waste. We have an environmental action manager who leads this work. And to date, we have 18 partners, all committed to environmental action and social justice, like Ardwick Climate Action, a local community group who've lost 60% of their green spaces in the last 5 years. Recently, alongside events and campaigns, we partnered with them to support the takeover of a closed section of a major road into Manchester, the A6. And with them, we helped them measure and raise awareness of the air pollution impacts beside their homes. We drew on our herbarium collections to recommend and then plant pollution combating hedgerows. This is museum work. We're supported by Arts Council in partnership with the charity, the Carbon Literacy Project, to support England's museum sector to become more carbon literate. We have a carbon literacy officer for museums. And Manchester Museum is actually the world's first carbon literate museum, and we've co-developed an accredited carbon literacy toolkit and trained hundreds of museum professionals with Museum Development Northwest team as a first step on their climate action journey. And ultimately, in all of this, it's action, I think, that gives rise to hope. Soon after we reopened in February, we received the all too rare transformative philanthropic funding to recruit a new role of social justice manager with Chloe Cousins. And Chloe supports the museum's work on family poverty, youth inclusion, and social mobility, with a belief that the museum could become a critical and much needed hub for social justice within the city over the coming years. 15 staff had already trained as social justice researchers, working collaboratively with researchers in the university to develop and deliver a pilot programme called Local Matters, addressing how poverty and disadvantage are understood and responded to within the museum and through its relationships and activities. Today, people tell us what they really want is emotional connections, not civic commemorations. But so much of the work of museums, in our museum, and I don't know about yours, but definitely in ours, it takes place on grounds that have been staked out by Western rationalism. And to be frank, we deny the laws, the realities, and the belief systems of other cultures and people, many of which, ironically, are most closely connected to the collections we hold. We have a curator of living cultures who cares for ethnographic collections, and his title is a constant reminder that objects in museums aren't just things. They embody the lives of their original makers and owners and have lives of their own. These belongings are filled with memories and stories, and through them we can make emotional connections with people across different times and places. And I really feel that if museums today and in the future are to reflect the complexity of the human condition and people's understanding of the world and each other, we've got to find more room in our work, in our lives, for the emotional and spiritual. And nowhere is this more true than in healing or return work, often called restitution or repatriation. So I'd like to end with a story that speaks to, I think, a more equitable future for museums. And to be honest, any reflection on future museums that doesn't grapple with this is ignoring quite a big elephant in the room. For many years in Manchester, we've considered the return of collections not as a loss, but as a gain, an act of repair, healing, and relationship building that gives communities and our museums new purpose, strength, and relevance. In 2019, we were the first museum in Europe to unconditionally return secret, sacred, and ceremonial material to communities of origin. And more recently, on the 5th of September, just in 2023, a delegation from the Aboriginal Anandiliakwa community of Brute Island joined us for a formal return of 174 cultural heritage items. And these included secular, everyday items, baskets, maps, and shell dolls, which you see here. We worked collaboratively with the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies and the Anandiliakwa Land Council over a 3-year period. And for the first time, museum staff were invited on country as part of the consultation process, an entire framework situated within UNDRIP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Georgina Young, our head of collections at the museum, shared her reflections afterwards, and I think it nails it. George said, "What's set on paper as part of a return request, no matter how comprehensive and nuanced, does not replicate embodied understanding. Indeed, our formats and requirements are deliberately designed not to feel like a conversation about kin. They're designed not to encompass the spiritual and emotional, the lived and the law. And yet this is human work." For the Anandaliakwa community, awareness of the return material has already unlocked a rich cultural history and inspired a contemporary art project, the Shell Doll project, and 2 of the artists were part of the Manchester delegation. So staff and visitors in the museum, when they came over, heard their voices and stories, and the artists led a shell doll making workshop for young female artists in Manchester, and we're working on a much larger campaign next year. This photo shows an embrace between the daughter of the anthropologist that collected the material, and they did collect it rather than it was taken, and the material that, and Amathea, one of the Anandaliakwa artists. UNESCO described the process not as a transaction, but as a collaboration, a dialogue, a project fueled by empathy, trust, and love. Maybe we need more work fueled by empathy, trust, and love. And as Dr. Mike Jones recently summarized, this focus on relationships in museums is relatively new and remains far from universal, but if museums are to remain relevant, trusted institutions, they're going to need to move beyond traditional models of authority. For over 2 years now, we've had a dedicated curator of Indigenous perspectives at Manchester, Dr. Alexandra Alberda, who works with communities across the world and on our doorstep. And it's a provocation from Alex that informs our work daily that I'd like to leave with you today. Alex said, "Can we imagine what the museum may be in the future as its social function shifts and people who previously had so little power in its definitions reconceptualize it and foster a process and culture of reconciliation and humility? For the future of our museum in Manchester, and I hope your museums too, I think we have to imagine and respond directly to that." Thank you.